Welcome to KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're telling the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. KC Cares is the intersection of the profit and nonprofit community, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. This KC Cares segment is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, www.kauffman.org. Every day, there are new tools to help us make decisions, and that's true in the nonprofit sector as well. One of the latest areas of fun is emotional research. Just what is that? How is emotional research conducted? Do we need those numbers and why? And once we have them, what do we do with them? Joining us to help answer those questions and more is Katie Lord. She's Vice President of Proof Positioning here in Kansas City. It's a market research company that specializes in understanding emotions and motivations. Welcome back, Katie. It's so great to have you.
Good to see you as always, and love Casey. I just love everything you guys are doing. So it always feels like coming home to be with you.
Oh, well, thank you. All right. Well, we got to start what's emotional research? Are we watching people cry in a room? I mean, what the heck? What the heck is it?
That's a great question. So emotional research is really the why behind people do things. So it is understanding the motivations for why people choose the coffee shop they go to, give, volunteer, buy one product over another. And we do all of that emotionally. And so emotional research is really trying to pinpoint what are the motivations so then we can serve people the content, the messages, and the social media or whatever that really resonates most with them and hits the keys that they're looking for. It talks about their values.
How old is this quote field? I mean, I said it was relatively new. Mm-hmm. In the long haul it is, but has it been around for a while?
Not really. We are an emerging field, I would definitely say. Really, a lot of the research that has been done in the last 30 years to really drive this forward. And, Antonio Damasio is who we found to do a lot of our research on. Same with Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. Both of those researchers and Thinking Fast and Slow, the book, really are the research that is the basis for what we do here at Proof, but also just on the field of motivations and drivers, if you will. We know that we have shorter attention spans. We know that we get bombarded with messages every day. And so it's really coming back to not just behavior, because behavior can tell you things, right? Like behavior can tell you, which coffee shop I like to go to, when I'm going to be there on a rainy day. If we need more muffins, that's what behavior can tell us. But it can't tell you why you walked into that coffee shop or why one animal shelter resonates with you more than maybe another animal shelter or domestic violence shelter or a cause. And so the emotional research and the emotional motivations, again, kind of goes back to the Simon Sinek, the why. And it's really a lot more basic than we like to think on what drives us as human beings.
Is this newer in the nonprofit? I mean, I've been hearing about those books and those kinds of things in the business world. Take us into our nonprofit sector.
Yes, it is a lot newer in the nonprofit sector. There are several organizations that are getting into this, and we have different methodologies, of course. But I actually love seeing more of this coming into the field, but it is relatively new because we have had tools in the past, such as wealth screenings and, focus groups, one-on-one interviews. Our sector is very good at talking to people. I don't know if we're very good at sometimes listening and or implementing what it is that we hear back because we have smaller sample sizes. And so, it's new coming into the sector as far as bringing it to scale. and looking at it across your entire donor database instead of just your high net worth individuals or your large donors, which are usually outliers. So we normally take what we learn from those individuals and try to put it across all of our donors, and our high net worth individuals and high net worth donors really are kind of unicorns, to be quite honest with you. They're not usually people that we can repeat. And so it's emerging in the fact that we're looking now at segmenting and personalizing and talking to our mass donors and not just our high net worth, and starting to fill out that mid-level donor, if you will, planning. And so that's where, emotional data can really come in. It can help you with high net worth. It can help you with a lot of different segmentation, but we know that we need to start talking to our segments. We know we need to be the Amazon and the Netflix, if you will, but emotional data is helping us to do that now at a larger scale, but still new.
I love your terminology of the unicorn. That's great. I'm a wannabe unicorn.
Yes, exactly. And we're all unicorns to certain organizations, right? But we also have the ones that we're monthly givers to, or the ones that, we go to the luncheon and we give to. I mean, I'm going to a luncheon today. And so it's going to be one of those where, how do we get that second gift? How do we keep that engagement, even if it's not going to be my top priority for giving? Or how do I become that top priority? Those are the kind of questions that we can answer using emotional data.
It sounds like emotional data in a way is kind of the secret sauce, as it will, for nonprofits to really know, to broaden the base. Maybe I'm breaking it down to simplicity too much. That it's something that I'll ask it as a question. Is this something every nonprofit ought to be looking at and doing? And I'll say that we know we've had conversations with you before. There are the biggies in the room, and then there's the small one-off, one person volunteers. So should everybody be using it? And if so, how do you make that happen?
That's a really good question. Of course, I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to say yes in context, right? Every organization has an area of growth, a question. We call them burning questions, but a question or a problem or something that they're like, if I knew the answer to this, I could do X, Y, and Z. I could grow my Wishin. I could convert volunteers to donors. I could recruit new volunteers. Everyone has one of those questions. So that is how emotional data works, is we help answer those questions. So of course, I'm going to say that yes, everyone can use emotional data. That being said, it is a cog in the larger development system, right? So I'm not going to sit here and say we're the silver bullet. No, we are a cog in a system. So how does that work? Yes, you should be doing your well screening. Yes, you should be doing emotional data. And that doesn't need to mean that you're boiling the ocean. You might just have one or two things that you can be working on for the next 2 to 3 years in your strategic plan. And you should be doing that and then finding out what those markers are, implementing those and helping to integrate that into your donor communications and your fundraising so that you can start moving people up into your up through your system, can start growing your next generation of donors, and can really connect with the donors you have. I think what's interesting is we all want more donors, but are we truly maximizing who we have in our database right now? And I can pretty much guarantee that every organization is not maximizing the individuals and the people that have already self-selected and said, yes, I am your fan. So it's really not just about acquiring new, but it's about growing those relationships and making those relationships meaningful to the donor at scale through using things like emotional data. So then you can keep feeding your capital campaign or your major gifts or your planned giving officers. So it is a part of a larger system that every organization should be integrating as just good development practice.
All right, well, I'm going to remind our viewers, and before we've talked to you as the millennial maven, now I've got to find the emo queen. So we've defined what this is, and we've talked a little bit about where you can use it. Okay, what is it and how is it collected? Because like you mentioned, focus groups and things like that. So how do you gather this? And is it numbers? Is it, how does it come back to me?
So that's a great question too. So it is probably when we tell people, what do we do? It's like we do surveys, and the people are kind of like, that's a bit of a letdown. But how our surveys are different than a survey that a normal company does is we measure your brain activity, right? I can measure down by milliseconds how long it's taking you to make a decision. I can tell if you're lying to me. I can tell if you've changed your decision. If you're trying to, kind of cheat the system, if you will, if you're trying to be like, oh, well, I feel like I should say this because it's socially acceptable. So we have built out just with Proof, our system. And so we can measure all of that. And then we come back and we do put numbers. So we take everything that you would maybe say to a donor or things that you've wanted to say, and we test that with individuals through a survey mechanism. And we are able to come back and say, okay, this message resonates with this group of people. And then there is a mathematical probability that if you do this, they're going to have that, take that action or behavior. So a great example is we worked with an organization here in Kansas City, and they were trying to figure out how to convert volunteers to donors. And we found through our survey that it was really two completely different messages that needed to be served up to the donors versus the volunteers. And so once we were able to pinpoint the correct message to the volunteers and how they wanted that message delivered, we saw a 30% increase in conversion rates just with the first email. So it really is, it's really taking, your big flowery mission and your language, boiling it down to your base points and finding what resonates with people and how they want to hear about it. And so we do it through surveys, and then, we come back and we put numbers. We have a scale from, 0 to 100. 0 is, this is not resonant, or it is negatively resonant, which, to be quite honest with you, I would rather somebody be negatively resonant than indifferent. The worst thing you can be to a donor is indifferent. So it's good that if you have strong, either positive or negative emotions, and we come back and say, this is a strong positive, this is a strong negative, and, put the math really behind it so that you have data to say, I can put numbers behind and justify why we're going to go with this direction. But it's surveys. So it's, maybe not the sexiest thing, but it's fast, it's easy. People understand how to use them. And there's also something within the sector called, the endowment effect. The more that you ask my opinion and the more I feel you're listening to me, the more I'm bought into your organization. So there's that byproduct of, okay, people get donations and things from just people taking the survey because now you're top of mind and I know that you're listening to me.
That's what Proof does. Is it similar with other organizations? Is this a survey-ish mechanism, listening to people or by way of checking a box?
A lot of times it's using some sort of survey. I'm going to say a problem, but the problem with sitting down and doing focus groups and other things, and I think there is a place for them. Again, I think there's a continuum, right? Like you need to do focus groups and you need to have those one-on-one conversations with your high net worth individuals. So I'm not saying that this replaces this at all, but what can happen in those is, again, we want to be seen in the best social light. So people lie, and they lie not because they're terrible people or because they're trying to be deceptive. We do because we're social creatures and we operate in a community and we want to be seen in the best social light. In focus groups, you can have groupthink. We always know that in focus groups, there's that one quiet person that isn't really saying much. And then you have one or two really domineering people that can maybe cause other people to be like, oh, well, maybe I should say that because, the loudest person in the room might be the person that I feel like has the most social capital in this place. And so it's kind of a way to gut check and to, make sure that you're getting some, honesty. It's harder to lie on our systems. But again, there's a place for everything. And so it is part of an integrated development plan. Both of them are. But ours is just, can have more math than interviews can. And I'm sure somebody's going to come up with a way to put math to that. And I'm excited for that.
We're talking with Katie Lord, our millennial maven, but now our emo queen. We're talking about emotional research, what it is, why it's important for everybody in this sector. Those of us working there, I would think it's important for the volunteers that also help you raise funds.
Oh, yeah.
So how does an organization, let's say you have the money to get the research, and that's something we should talk about. How do you then take that data and move it outside of the top executives of the organization to your, let's say, your chieftains who are out there as volunteers helping you raise funds? How do you transition?
Oh, that's so great. That's great. So one of the things that we do here at Proof, because we're nerds, we do research on research. We just did a research project actually. And we constantly are trying to figure out, what's the best way for people to absorb data, get data, and be able to use it, right? So the things that we have found out is people want data fast, and they want to be able to understand, even if they weren't in the room, what is this telling me? And so our data comes back, and then we break it down to a very bite-sized, almost sound bite thing. Most people, I don't care. I'll be quite honest. I work here and I don't care about the pivot tables. I don't need to know that. I just need to know how this can be implemented to raise more money. And so, there are cheat sheets that we can make. There are kind of like, if you say this, to this person, and there's, ways that we can segment it down. And so it's really something that when an organization gets this data, they can go train their volunteers in, after a meeting with us, they can sit down and say, okay, guys, this is, how we need to be talking to these individuals, and create those bulleted talking points, because that comes out in our research is here's the bulleted talking points. And so you can hand that to your volunteers and to your, your volunteer fundraisers or your board and your committee, and they are then equipped to go out and do that. And to be quite honest with you, it's a little bit more empowering to be like, okay, I know that I need to ask these questions. And then if I hear this, then this is what I need to say. And it makes it less terrifying, because you at least have a starting place, right? You're like, okay, the math says that if I say this to this person, then, we can have a dialogue, and then I can take a conversation where it needs to go. And so, that's what is exciting, I guess, about this is it is so transferable to not just staff, but also to people on the front lines and our volunteers who, not everyone loves to be a fundraiser. And I mean, if you can, if we can equip them to a point of being comfortable in an inherently uncomfortable situation, then all the better.
All right, let's get to that question. How much does this cost me? We've talked about the one person nonprofit to the gargantuans. All right, everybody needs money, but how much is it going to cost me to get this? And I need it if I'm the small guy?
Yeah, and that's one of those things where, we're trying to figure it out here at Proof. And, we've done research on research, but, it ranges. So, kind of the starting price is, $9,500. And then if, you need massive amounts of research, it goes up from there. But our thing is, you should expect at least a 10x return on this. So if you come in and you spend that $9,500, you should expect 10 times that in a return if you implement what the data says. And so it's one of those things where you need to do a cost benefit analysis, but it's also one of those that people's emotions don't change. Okay, our emotions are set by the time we're 14 years old. So it's, unless there's, some trauma or things like that, like, big life events. So this isn't something you need to do every year, which, I hate saying that, but it's something that, it's one of those, unless you have different questions, whatever you do with us should last you 3 to 5 years. So it's an investment knowing that you can carry that through, use that. And then if something else comes up, great, give us a call. If not, then just keep doing what you're doing. And there's other little, gut checks that we can help you with along the way, that are much smaller engagements. But, it's done in 45 days. So it's not a long, engagement from start to finish. It's a month and a half to get the data and you can start running. So it's not a long lead time as far as, okay, when can I start seeing results and making money off of it? Because again, time, I would say, is the number one thing as fundraisers we don't have. If we could all clone ourselves, we would, because we're like, there just aren't enough hours in the day. And it's true. So that's what we're trying to do. And so if I have a tool that can help me be faster, more efficient, and make money, let's do it. Let's do it.
I'll let you take a sip of your coffee. I've been asking you so many questions.
No, that's fine.
You say our emotions don't change past 14. Oh my gosh, I'm so worried about a few people I know. What though can slightly impact? For example, we're coming out, we're shifting the look at this thing called the pandemic. And it had big impact on everybody. There's been all kinds of analyses, whatever, on, the impact on the nonprofit community, and some nonprofits did better, some had to shut their doors. So have you, in this world of emotional research, has that had an impact, number one? And number two, is it a permanent impact, or is it something that we're going to get through?
We're going to get through it. And actually what we found in the research is this. There is COVID, even though it has been long and kind of traumatic, it's like a weather event, right? It has been affecting us. It is something that we're going to come out of, especially in the fundraising sector. There is trauma that has happened from COVID. There are people that have long haulers syndrome. There are people, that have lost loved ones. But outside of that, it's mostly being looked at as a weather event, and and it's not going to have some of the long-term impacts. Now, that's not to say that, again, there is a group of people that have had very traumatic, maybe we're intubated, we're in the hospital. Yes, that will affect that could and may affect their outlook on certain things. So it might impact their impact on the healthcare system. Is it going to change the way they operate day to day? Probably not as much, but it might change the way that they feel about certain things. And so that will be something that we're going to have to watch and see how that, that trends, like, trust in the medical field, trust in the government, we've seen some of that kind of come out, and people's emotions are changing on that. But, a great analogy is, what baseball team did you grow up cheering for? If you're not from here, you are a Royals fan now, probably, but you always cheered for another team because that's what you grew up with. So when people are like, well, I'm a, Broncos fan or whatever, it's like, okay, well, did you grow up, were you raised a Broncos fan? And is that why it's your team? And so, or, are you raised a Chiefs fan and you move away from Kansas City and you're like, I'm Chiefs all the time. So that's, yes, there is trauma. There are things that happen, if you look at like after 9/11 and things like that, lots of trauma happened and people's opinions just change on things. So it is very much a personalized experience. And that's why we say that, emotions as a rule don't change. You and I are extroverts. We're not going to become introverts tomorrow. It's just not going to happen. We're not going to become introverts next year, right? So those types of things aren't going to change. But, certain opinions could, based on traumatic experiences.
We've got a few minutes left. What tips could you provide for our audience as, okay, now I know what emotional research is. What should I keep in mind in selecting or using that? Are there some easy breezy tips I need to do and make a check within my own organization?
Yeah, actually, well, it's kind of funny. So we actually have a quiz, which I can send to you. That's like, am I ready for market research? Am I ready for emotional data? Is this something that would be of interest, to kind of gut check and see if you're going to do it? Because my thing is like, I never want somebody to invest in something and not use it and it sit on the shelf, like ever. And so, it's what I would say is, if nothing else from this conversation, if you use Proof, if you don't use Proof, great. But you should be sending out some sort of survey every year, at least to your donor population, even if it's something that you do for yourself. You won't get the motivations and things or as deep of a data, but you'll at least get a gut check on maybe a couple things. It will help build that relationship. It will help let your donors know that you care and you are interested in what they have to say. Caveat, if you're not going to do anything with that data, don't ask them. But if it's one of those, because that's frustrating to donors. They're like, well, they asked me and I never saw something happen. Even if you come back and are like, hey, this is what you guys said, and this is what we're going to do with it, or hey, this is what you said, and here's why we're not going to do that. Again, it opens up that constant communication and lets people build that continued rapport with you of they care, they're listening. And it might just be simple things, 5 questions on, would you prefer email, phone call, or peer ask to come to our event? Or, we're thinking about changing the theme for our event next year. What would you like to see? It doesn't have to be, these deep philosophical questions, but ask your people something and do something with it. Have that engagement. So whether that's with Proof or something else, and just continually be curious. Even, we do an exercise that is fun, and it's something that we love to do with boards or senior leadership teams, where it's just an ideation. If I knew this, what could it do? It's free. It's 30 minutes. There's no hard sell afterwards, but it's just it's an ideation, and that we walk people through. And you should always be curious. You should always be like, if I knew this, what would I do, or how would it help me? Even just having those questions in your head or in the back of your head, again, even if you're not going to do anything with them, will change your perspective on how you're looking at making decisions moving forward within your organization. So, those are some things that I would say, everyone can do. There are some great books that I will tell, I love Change for Good. There's one I'm reading right now called Making the Ask. Both of them are by Bernard Ross, who is really taking, the data movement and behavioral economics in the UK and is, coming to the US, but is really on the forefront of this movement and, writes books that I think everyone can understand and gives you just great tips and tricks that you can implement like that as well into your organizations to help you raise more money. So, just be curious and constant, and know that this is, it's new, but it's not going away. So it's going to be something that you're going to want to think about at some point, because, Netflix and Amazon and a lot of these other companies have us figured out. And donors.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
You go to shop, and they're like, did you forget this in your cart? So our donors are expecting that as far as content and engaging with us as well.
And we'll share those book titles and some of Katie's tips on our Facebook page. And, it's proofpositioning.com if you're interested in using their organization. But be curious, go out there. Google is a great thing. Who knew that Googling would become a verb? You've been in the business a hot minute. You're younger than I, but it's interesting to me in our relationship, just watching the things and the tools that have become available. But I still think there's a lot of gut to us and that passion. And it's just figuring out, I guess, to analyze it better so that we can be smarter in what we do and really listening. It's a gut check, but I know I've also heard from you a lot. We've got to become, if we're not already working on it, just better listeners.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, Katie, thank you as always. It's just a delight and a pleasure. You'll be back. We know you'll be back.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. For KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice, we're produced by Charitable Communications, also a nonprofit. This KC Cares segment was brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, www.kauffman.org. If you'd like to be a guest on KC Cares or Underwriting Opportunities, please visit our website, kccaresonline.org, and spread the love. You'll find us on Facebook and Twitter at KC Cares Radio and on Instagram at KC Cares Online. And you can catch us Saturday mornings on ESPN 1510 and 94.5 FM. That's at 8 a.m. when you're driving around on a Saturday morning. Thank you for joining us on KC Cares.